In this video, I wanted to talk about 12 ways that you're ruining your life without realizing it. Because what I'll be talking about are basically 12 cognitive biases that can completely affect how you think, feel, how you approach life, how you achieve your goals, everything. And personally for me, when I didn't pay attention to these cognitive biases and I fell victim to them, that's where it led to a lot of frustration, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of just wasted time. So I wanted to cover these 12 things because these are probably the 12 mistakes that I've made that I kind of want you to avoid. So first up, we have confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is basically where we only look for information that supports what we already believe in and just ignore the rest. So I have an example here, but this applies to everything. Like when I was picking university degrees, I had in mind that I wanted to do medicine. And so I was just looking for only information that said medicine was the best choice. Medicine was the best choice. Anything, any Wikipedia article, any Reddit post that said medicine was not the best choice, instead it was this other career, I just ignored that. And as a result, I kind of just ended up with this career direction where I didn't actually fully understand what it was about. And it was only a few years in that I realized hang on, this isn't exactly, what I enjoy. And so this is the danger of confirmation bias, because you'll end up locking yourself into a point of view that you may not even necessarily agree in. And so the way to avoid this is to deliberately and actively seek out information that contradicts what you know. So let's say my goal is to get into medicine or go down this medical path. I would deliberately search all the sources that say why medicine is not the choice to make. And if I look at all those sources and I disagree with them, and then I make my choice of going to medicine, that is a much better outcome because then I have the full picture. So that's number one. The second bias is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is something that's completely ruined a lot of progress that I've made. Basically, the Dunning-Kruger effect, to put simply, is when dumb people think they're smart. And you might think, wait, how's that even possible? And the thing is, when you don't know a lot about a subject, but you've started to learn about it, and you're learning a lot, given a short amount of time, you feel like you have a lot of knowledge because you have very high confidence. But in reality, compared to the vast amount of knowledge this entire field has, you only know a small fraction. So let's say you went from knowing 1% of a topic to 2%. Yes, technically you've doubled the amount of knowledge you have, but in the grand scheme of things, you still only know 2%. But the issue with the Dunning-Kruger effect is that it says that people that go from 1% to 2%, they double the amount of knowledge they know. Now they think they're experts. They think they're the best people in this game or whatever. And so it just leads to a lot of overconfidence. So this is where a beginner driver, especially L players when me last year, think they're super good in driving until they almost get into a crash. Or guys when they say they can fight, even though they've only taken one boxing lesson. So it's a very damaging effect because it's this overconfidence that leads to many downfalls. And the way to overcome this is, first of all, it's actually very hard. But second of all, it's to do something called a pre-mortem analysis, which is essentially where you think beforehand of all the things that could be wrong about your decision-making process. So let's say I think I'm a really good driver. I would actually think about all the ways that I could actually make a mistake, that I could get into an accident, all the things that I may not actually know. And it's that forced open-mindedness that actually allows you to overcome this Dunning-Kruger effect. But to be honest, this is something that I write down in my journal every single day because I keep falling victim to this. For example, I pick up a new skill learning guitar. I watch a few lessons, I learn a few chords, and I think I'm the best musician in the world. But obviously I'm not. So it's something that I have to constantly remind myself, because if I don't pay attention to this, then it's actually going to mean that I don't make any progress. And worst case is I get into an accident of some sorts. So that's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Number 3 is the sunk cost fallacy. So this is another cognitive bias that basically means that we kind of stick with something because we've already invested the time into it. For example, like for me, this is a personal example. I'm staying in med school, even though I hate maybe is a strong word. I kind of put it into ChatGPT to word it. So staying in med school, even though I may think there's better careers, only because I've put in years of effort already. And so it's like, yeah, I feel like it's going to waste, right, if I don't continue off with med. But actually the way to overcome the sunk cost fallacy is literally just to ignore it. Like anything in the past basically does not exist. And so make decisions as if you're starting from zero every day, which is very hard. And it's hard because of the sunk cost fallacy. But it's like a weird thing where the sunk cost fallacy is completely like, it's true in the sense that everything you've already invested time and energy into, it does not count. You can't like factor that into your decision-making process. Like that basically does not exist. You have to act as if there's nothing that you've already invested into it and you're starting from zero, which is incredibly hard. And to be honest, like I'm still trying to navigate through the sunk cost fallacy right here. So yeah, keen to hear your thoughts on this one if you're going through like something similar. Next one is loss aversion. So loss aversion is basically the idea that we fear losing something more than we value like gaining the same amount. Basically, we're very scared of losing something. And I don't think this is a inherently like bad thing. Like for example, if you're scared of losing like, friends or relationships, like that's completely fine. Like I think that's a valid fear. It's in the cases of like for example, when you want to invest in like yourself, let's say you want to buy this online course that, is potentially like risky. You might, not get value from it. It might be a scam, but there is that potential upside as well. You may learn something new that completely changes your life. But since you're scared of losing that little bit of money, you don't go ahead with buying the course, even though potentially that would have brought you a lot of benefit. And so this is the idea of loss aversion. And the idea here is under certain circumstances, we need to treat like wins and losses as the same. Like, yes, I might buy this course and I may lose $200, but the potential upside is also there. Obviously, like, there's nuances to this, but I feel like for me personally, I always I'm just like scared to like invest money or to invest time into certain things because I'm scared that I'll just lose something. When in reality, because I'm so scared of losing something, I never get the opportunity to tap into those like big opportunity gains, whether that be learning, relationships, or whatever. The most simple example is I don't want to talk to a girl because I'm afraid I'm going to lose my dignity. Yes, you have the massive upside of getting into a loving relationship, but because you're scared of getting rejected and scared of that like 10-second embarrassing moment, you don't end up asking to go out. So that's happened to me multiple times. And I can tell you that loss aversion has greatly affected my life in that way. So I really want you to avoid this. But that's loss aversion. Next one is availability bias. And availability bias is basically we just rely on the information that's most available to us. So let's say I go on YouTube and I just find a bunch of videos recommended to me about why you should use flashcards for studying. If I was actually trying to refine my study approach and I just picked those low-hanging fruits, the videos that were just recommended to me, I would start to think that, flashcards are the best thing in the world, but I would never consider the actual big picture because I'm just kind of picking the things closest to me. It's kind of like if you're taking advice on career direction, but you're only taking career advice from the people closest to you, let's say your friends or your family. It's not a wise idea because you need to get information from a wide variety of sources to basically scope out the big picture. And then sure, you may like to, stick with your family's choice because you have more trust in them, but you're doing yourself a disservice by not actually seeking out more information. And so that's the way to overcome availability bias, to make sure that you're not just seeking the information closest to you and you're actually trying to see the full picture. Next up is the backfire effect. This has happened so many times. Basically, when someone challenges you and says you're wrong, we double down on why we're right rather than reconsidering. And this is kind of just because our egos get in the way. When someone, when I'm talking about YouTube strategy with my coworkers and they say, hey, I disagree with that, I almost instinctively try and defend myself rather than even considering what they're saying. And I realized the way to overcome this is honestly just dropping your ego, control your emotions, and actually see things for what it is. And also this is where establishing trust is important because I know with my work colleagues, them disagreeing isn't because they like hate me. It's because they genuinely want us as the team to achieve the common goal. And so in this case, it's just about putting my personal ego aside, and just seeing the situation for what it is, rather than letting my own like emotions get in the way. So that's how you overcome the backfire effect. Next one is the fundamental attribution error. So this is where you blame someone's actions on their like personality rather than like considering like external like factors. Basically, you're misattributing what the cause of something is. So for example, I have this example here, thinking someone is a bad driver because they're careless when it was actually bad weather. So the idea here is just, again, consider all factors and you're not misattributing a cause to an effect. And I think that's like super key. So for example, just to use the girl example again, let's say I ask a girl out and she rejects me, which has happened. I could attribute that to the fact that, I'm just, not cut out for it. I'm like awkward, I'm not sociable, I'm like not a good person that, people want to hang out with. Like that could be a way I could attribute it. But there could also be so many external factors in this like entire situation that I didn't consider. So, which I learned about afterwards, by the way, but that's another story for another day. But it's the idea that like there's just so many factors or variables that go into a certain outcome. And if you just think about one variable leading to one outcome as the sole like reason, you're oftentimes neglecting the broader picture. So again, the takeaway for a lot of these is just to try and consider multiple perspectives. Number 8, halo effect. The halo effect is where you assume one good trait means the other person has another good trait. So typically this is like when someone's attractive, you think they're also like smart. And this has been shown in like the research as well, that attractive like employees tend to like get higher raises because people think they're like smart or whatever. There's a couple ways around it. Like if you're like the employer, the way you would do that is you need to dissociate like, for example, like looks from like the actual ability and see things objectively. But if you're the employee, it's almost like you kind of want to focus on like how you look like physically. I'm not saying like, to be like, like super like detailed or like, a spaz about it, but it's kind of like, there's basic things you can do, like, hygiene, like, basic stuff. Anyways, so that's the halo effect. Number 9 is the anchoring bias. I don't know why. Okay, this kind of cuts off a bit. But anchoring bias is like when the first piece of information we hear sticks and influences our choices. So this is like a common sales technique. Like let's say someone, like if you go just on like any like online platform and they have like 3 options, like the beginner, the middle, or the professional plan. The beginner is like, $5, the medium plan is like $50, and then the professional plan is like $500. When you see the $500, you go, oh wow, that's so expensive. I'm not going to buy that. And so you go, okay, should I get beginner? Well, beginner looks kind of shitty. Well, I guess I'll get like medium, because the medium offer is $50. That's like, 1/10 of the total price of $500. So it's pretty good value. And then you go with the like middle option. But if that happens, you've just fell victim to anchoring bias. Because oftentimes when companies put out this very expensive offer, it's not actually for people to buy it. It's just to anchor the price. So you think $500 is expensive, which makes $50 or whatever other option seem much cheaper. And so again, you have to ignore the anchor, which is very hard, but that's the way you overcome anchoring bias. Next one is self-serving bias. So taking credit for successes, but blaming others on external factors for failures. So as you can see, this example here. And yeah, this is honestly like one of those annoying things where like sometimes we just think we're like too good. And that's definitely happened for me for a lot of times. Like when it comes to like YouTube strategy, we have to pick like, like my job is like to manage this creator's YouTube channel. I have to pick like their titles, their thumbnails, things like that. Sometimes I realize like when I pick a title and it works well, I'm like, yeah, I'm the man. Yep, that's my job. I'm the best at this. But when it failed, I go, that's the YouTube algorithm. It's out of chance or whatever. And ultimately, like it just does not serve me well at all, because I don't learn from the experience. I end up like kind of just like playing the victim card, to be honest. And it's just not a great look on like in front of your team as well. So self-serving bias is definitely something to like keep in mind to avoid. The next one is survivorship bias. So this is where we only look at successful examples and ignore all the failures. So the example here is looking at like college dropouts like Bill Gates or like Zuck, and thinking that dropping out is the key to success, even though we don't see all the people that failed. And so the way to overcome this is actually similar to the final bias, which I want to mention at the same time because they're fairly similar. And the final bias is bandwagon fallacy. This is basically assuming something is right just because a lot of people do it. For example, the example my mentor gave me was just because slavery was common doesn't mean it was right. So there's a difference between common and right, which oftentimes we kind of conflate the two together. So, for example, thinking uni is the best choice to do because most people do it. Well, we don't question the necessity of it because we just say most people do it, so we'll just follow them. It must be good, right? And so the way to overcome both the bandwagon fallacy and survivorship bias is you really have to ask yourself, of the people that chose this method, how many of them were successful? Who were they? What were they like? And people that went down this path, how many were unsuccessful? Like, what were they like? What were their values? Were they similar to you? That's how you actually know if a method is effective or not, by considering, again, both sides to the equation. Both people that actually made it through whatever thing you're talking about, let's say going to uni, and also the people that didn't make it by doing whatever you want, like dropping out of uni. So that's just an example of whether dropping out of uni is the best choice. You can't just look at some famous person like Bill Gates and go, cool, he did it. That means dropping out of uni must be good, and vice versa as well. So these are the 12 cognitive biases, which are the top 12 ones that I found that can ruin your life. And the reason why they're called cognitive biases is because they're cognitive biases. It's very hard to see them happening in the meantime. And the research is kind of scary because it says that even if you know that these things are happening, you still fall victim to them. But the only way that you can kind of minimize it is just to be hyper aware of how these things manifest in your life. So I hope that with these 12 ways that you'll start avoiding some of these mistakes. And that's something that I'll be keeping at the forefront of my mind as well. But yeah, have a great day.